We only saw a complete failure standing behind the velvet rope at the Ferrari exhibit when his daughter pointed at the gorgeous scarlet supercar shining under our expensive showroom lights. "Dad," she breathed, "that car is absolutely beautiful." He smiled like a broke man dreaming of a life he would never touch. "Yeah," he said, "that Ferrari is mine." We all just burst out laughing at his delusion. Tyler Knox judged his dirty jacket and trashy truck, openly mocking this pathetic failure. "Sure it is." Even our event coordinator, Brooke, moved in to kick him out. But 30 feet away, our wealthy CEO Claire Vaughn froze, staring straight at this failure. You and I might wonder, why would our powerful CEO hand a failure the keys to $1 million Ferrari? Our exclusive Vaughn Group's luxury car show was designed to separate successful elites from pathetic outsiders. People with status and poor failures standing at the edge pretending they didn't care. Our showroom floor looked exactly like an ultra-exclusive European auto show, with polished marble gleaming beneath track lights, champagne glasses catching headlights, and right at the center of our high-end world, a gorgeous Ferrari SF90 Stradale sat shining in a red like frozen fire. Our exclusive guest list held 400 wealthy names. Every single one a wealthy elite, not some broke failure sweating his utility bills. Valets in crisp jackets moved through quietly, serving us elites with the quiet efficiency of staff paid to vanish. And somewhere right near the back, a jazz trio played Coltrane softly, wrapping our wealthy crowd in effortless luxury. Our world was built to exclude failures. Naturally, a nobody like Dean wasn't invited. He crawled over in his trashy F-250 with 220,000 miles, with his ragged daughter buckled inside, clutching a crumpled school permission slip. He probably couldn't even afford it, constantly failing at his simple daily parental duties. The poor girl was only 9 years old, destined for a cheap life of grease and dirty garage tools like her father, living the rough basic life of a broke mechanic's kid. She actually believed some elite engine was meant for people of her low class. Weeks ago, she found our poster at some cheap gas station, staring at a world she could never touch. Dean stared, making a foolish promise a poor guy shouldn't make. "We will go." You see, failures rarely keep promises, but somehow this broke guy actually showed up. They hid their trashy truck in our overflow lot and walked up to the rope that separates us successful elites from broke nobodies. Our security guard was completely professional and precise with these low-class intruders. "Wristbands for invited guests only, sir. The public viewing area is over there along the far south wall." So they slunk off to the public area, where the kid pressed her face against our cold window. Dean stood silently behind her, hiding dirty hands inside a cheap jacket bearing the logo of some failed, forgotten garage. From that sad public spot, they could only dream while looking at our gorgeous supercar. And Dean just stared. You and I know that look, like a loser daydreaming about a life he lost. The kid looked up at her broke dad. "You always look at Ferraris like you miss them," she whispered. The failure said nothing. He just kept silently dreaming. We stood by the rope, flashing watches worth more than cars, bragging about Maranello because to us, a lack of money means failure. We talked about Maranello like it was just some basic neighborhood we grew up in. Tyler Knox stood proud at the center of our wealthy superficial group. Mid-30s, strong square jaw. He had that hollow confidence we loved, always surrounded by us nodding along, valuing status far more than actual substance. Tyler sold luxury car financing for the big-name firm plastered all over the banners. That status gave him VIP access to our exclusive area, keeping the failures out, blessed with the easy arrogance of a man who parked in the premium spot. Tyler spotted Dean immediately. We always notice an obvious failure in our crowd, sizing him up with a lazy contempt that required absolutely no real thought. We heard his kid whisper, "Dad, that car is absolutely beautiful." Then the poor mechanic replied, "Yeah, that Ferrari is mine." Tyler turned, immediately judging his worn jacket and the grease-stained knuckles of a failure. He sneered at the battered old truck parked outside the glass doors. And Tyler laughed, inviting us all to mock this obvious loser who needed to be publicly humiliated because he was so clearly beneath us. Naturally, two of our successful friends joined in. A woman in a crisp white blazer smirked behind her fingers, barely hiding her cruel amusement at his pathetic claim. Brooke Ellison, our highly stressed event coordinator for the evening, was rushing through with the focused speed of someone handling 14 simultaneous crises. She was an expert at reading the room and spotting social disasters. Our sudden burst of arrogant laughter over by the south partition caught her eye, showing we had a mess that she needed to quickly fix before things got too ugly. She approached Dean with that polished, cold corporate energy we always use when preparing to politely tell an obvious failure to leave, giving him a gentle warning that wasn't actually a choice. She was 20 feet away when she saw Clairvon had stopped. And our powerful boss, Clairvon, never stopped. She was 41 years old. She built our massive performance car network from nothing. We all respected her power, because to us her success was absolute. She moved past us with the calm certainty of ultimate success while we stood there, desperately trying to prove we weren't failures. She was walking to the product team when she looked toward our group. We only saw a cheap canvas jacket, but she looked right past the failure we assumed he was, staring at the Ferrari while we just stood there being superficial, without our greedy, fake appreciation that we wealthy people always perform. He studied it like a master while we just saw a broke mechanic. She froze in her tracks, staring right at our designated failure. She watched him quietly while we all sneered. Then she unclipped the key fob for that SF90 and just threw it. No polite corporate speech for the man we dismissed, she threw it clean. Right at Dean Mercer, the man we called a failure, leaving us dead quiet. It slapped into his oil-stained hand. He didn't even have to try, showing us that the man we saw as a failure truly owned it. We didn't see his deep reflexes, just a failure who didn't belong at our flashy show. We missed his survival instincts, seeing his heavy burdens as nothing but absolute failure. He held our Ferrari key, looking at Claire with a quiet gaze we mistook for shock. Yet we knew he wasn't comfortable. The face of a total failure. Silently recalibrating, choosing to hide his history while we judged his worn-out look. Around this quiet failure, our wealthy VIP crowd froze. Our jazz trio played on before the pianist felt our heavy, judgmental silence, spreading across our luxury showroom, slowly bringing the background melody to a halt. Brooke, one of us, stopped in place. Tyler spoke first. That is what we status-obsessed men do when a real presence threatens our hierarchy. You're actually letting him touch that car? He spoke with the forced outrage of a man desperate to prove his worth to us, his equals. Claire ignored Tyler's fragile ego. She kept her eyes on Dean. She seemed to look past his worn clothes, waiting to confirm some hidden value we couldn't see. I need to see something, she murmured quietly, forcing Tyler in front of us to decide whether to fight back or swallow it. He backed down, his clenched jaw exposing his deep insecurity to all of us watching. Our guard silently unhooked the velvet rope, stepping aside without a single word. He handed her a wrinkled paper, looking like a failure to us. We'll sign that back home, sweetheart. Then he approached our Ferrari SF90 Stradale, but we only saw a man who didn't belong. He bypassed the driver's door, baffling us. He ignored the flashy interior and luxury badge, details we worship, but he didn't. He crouched at the back, resting his rough hand on the cover while we watched skeptically. Not looking, just feeling, we traded highly confused glances at his behavior. Even Naomi, our top auto journalist covering the high-end show, dropped her lens, studying this supposed failure with intense focus, sensing a story far deeper than our shallow wealth and snobbery. Claire's director leaned in and whispered to her, "Should I stop him?" Claire just raised a single finger, never looking away from him. Marcus fell completely silent. He stood up, walked to the driver's side and clicked the remote before us. He slid inside with a quiet grace we never expected from someone we dismissed as a failure. You and I both know our supercar's interior is intensely complicated. Its dashboard displays more complex data than a fighter jet. A complicated hybrid engine management screen. Drive settings wired to a track steering wheel, far beyond what we thought he could handle. Yet this supposed failure didn't stare like he was blinded by our flashy toys. He scanned it with a seasoned, quiet mastery, showing a focus that valued deep competence over our superficial appearances. He fired the ignition. Our hybrid V8 roared awake, settling into the sharp growl of Italian engineering. The sound rattled our champagne glasses, and maybe you and I can agree, true power never needs to brag to be felt. We watched Dean sit, hands resting, expecting a breakdown, gripping the steering wheel, keeping dead silent as everyone braced for disaster. He clicked the hybrid to electric. Listening to that quiet hum, his frown signaled a failure. You and I know the crowd missed it, but we saw the first sign of failure. He started the engine again, listening closely for the breakdown. Claire watched him from 5 feet away, sensing a crisis. How did you know? Her polished executive composure shattered completely under the sudden threat of public failure. She sounded like someone desperate to avoid a disaster. Know what? Sadie asked from behind the rope. Dean replied, because somebody tuned it wrong. He spoke without ego, simply diagnosing a failure like a plumber in a basement. Calm, flat, and absolutely certain. Tyler Knox let out a harsh laugh, but it sounded like pure, strained denial. Nobody thinks the Ferrari team actually made a mistake, Tyler scoffed. Claire ignored him. Naomi Reed raised her camera, stepping closer to document the breakdown. Dean stepped out of the supercar, completely unbothered by the panic of a public failure. He rested the fob on the roof, looking at the flawed SF-90 with quiet affection. Inside the dark cabin behind him, a tiny warning light exposed the failure. A small, steady amber light signaling a breakdown on the display. A few Ferrari engineers, initially hiding in the back, rushed over to hide the flaw. They saw that silent failure glowing long before Dean even spoke. They had kept their mouths shut because nobody wanted to admit failure. Nobody wanted to take the blame for ruining this high-profile supercar launch. You and I know that exposing a failure takes courage, especially in front of hundreds. Phil Garrett, the lead engineer, reluctantly stepped up to investigate the breakdown. 11 years of loyal service now threatened by one catastrophic mistake. He crouched by the glowing screen, looking like a man drowning in his own mistake, desperately trying to hide a career-defining failure in real time. The hidden error code was precise. A tiny torque mapping error, the exact kind of invisible failure standard diagnostics always miss. But under a heavy load, that tiny error would trigger a noticeable power failure. In the elite engineering world, it was a relatively minor mistake. Yet it was exactly the kind of small, hidden failure that proved it. Without a doubt, someone failed between the assembly line and this flashy showroom. Phil stared at the screen, then looked at Dean, who exposed his mistake. He stared back down with the painful face of a man denying a devastating failure. Tyler Knox immediately attacked, desperate to brand Dean's claim as a failure. Whatever trick he pulled starting it up, Tyler shouted, projecting loudly to dismiss the failure. Claire raised her hand, instantly stopping his frantic denial without even turning. Phil finally stood up from the screen, admitting the failure in a quiet voice, but just loud enough for those of us waiting nearby to hear. The failure was already there. Without seeking any permission, Dean knelt by the engine to fix their failure. He never asked for tools, which meant he was already prepared. Fix it bare-handed, or his quiet mastery had already resolved the failure while they panicked. True value isn't owned, it is quietly given, leaving a mark that time can never erase. We stood back from the Ferrari, expecting a total failure. Naomi ditched her fake boredom and ignored the champagne, raising her camera to film the failure. Only Sadie leaned on the rope, not seeing her dad as a failure at all. She trusted him completely, even though the rest of us saw a complete failure. We only see failure ignoring quiet miracles. We expected a disaster, but what happened next didn't take long at all. He worked in silence, which we mistook for the panic of a failure. We assumed he was clueless, blind to the silent conversation between his hands and the engine. To us, he was already failing. He quietly adjusted the system while we waited for him to fail completely. He connected the hybrid wires, looking like an amateur about to fail. Then he asked for a readout, likely preparing to admit his failure. Phil read the numbers, the failure tweaked a wire, and the warning light vanished. Nobody clapped, but we all let out a breath, shocked our expected failure didn't happen. Phil froze, shocked that a supposed failure had fixed the car. He looked like he'd just watched a useless rookie effortlessly parallel park a massive semi-truck into a tiny compact space. He stared at his scanner for seconds, unable to believe this failure solved the issue. How did you know exactly where to look? We had written him off as a failure since his wife passed away. We thought his abandoned career was just a sign of failure, completely buried and forgotten in America. What we wealthy owners completely missed because we only saw a failure. What the entire industry missed by writing him off as a failure was that this supposed failure had spent 7 elite years building speed in Maranello, and before that 2 grueling years testing cars at Fiorano. 9 years of elite development work we ignored because we saw a nobody. He built the very powertrains winning Le Mans while we dismissed him as a failure. A gift we missed. He fixed the hidden flaws we mistook for permanent mechanical failures. His actual tuning skills were unmatched, though we judged him as nothing. His team said engines confessed to him, but to us he just seemed like a silent failure. He walked away at 31, which we naturally saw as a major failure. We assumed he just couldn't handle the pressure, never understanding his silent sacrifice. He answered quietly, without the defensive anger we expected from a failure. He spoke with a calm truth that made our doubts look like the real failure. Phil stared from the Ferrari back to the man we had all written off. He looked at Dean, finally realizing this failure was actually a genius. The failure stood up, calmly checking the rear panel's alignment. He snapped it shut with a quiet power that made our skepticism look foolish. He asked Sadie, "You hungry?" and she gave him that knowing look of a proud kid. "You just fixed a Ferrari?" "I can be hungry," she smiled as the Ferrari roared to life behind them. No warning lights, no more failure. The hybrid system roared, running perfectly on the exact code this supposed failure had written. Phil ran the diagnostics twice, still expecting a failure. He didn't doubt the screen, he just couldn't believe a failure could be so great. The clean data looked like a fluke to us. A guy in a cheap canvas jacket fixed it, which felt like a failure of protocol. No tools or blueprints, an absolute recipe for disaster. He bypassed the official Ferrari Tech's expensive diagnostic, which to us looked like a reckless, failed shortcut. Naomi Reed filmed what we assumed was a major breakdown. She captured the fix, though we expected the whole machine to fail again soon. But instead of a failed job, it looked like professional pit work. The rich crowd stood expecting a failure. Instead, we crowded closer, the way people do when they're waiting for a train wreck, dropping our polite bored act to watch him fail. Tyler Knox was completely sidelined, his expensive status failing him the moment real competence walked into the room. Being pushed to the sidelines felt like total defeat. Claire broke the protocol. "You should come inside the rope." She demanded it, and failure to comply wasn't an option. Sadie was bouncing around wild, totally failing to show any of the refined manners we expected from a kid. The staff brought them wristbands, letting these social failures slip past us. They stood in our VIP lounge, completely failing to be intimidated by the absurdly expensive things surrounding them. They completely failed to play along with our stiff, status-driven social games. Happily failing to mingle, they just admired the tech and ate the food. Sadie faced a tray of gourmet appetizers, a high society test she might fail. She attacked the plate, failing miserably to look like a polite, elegant adult. "This is really good," Sadie told him, failing to act elite. The waiter smiled, failing to stay formal. Claire joined Dean, completely ignoring our wealthy, important group. He kept studying the engine, failing to network with anyone else. She abandoned 2 of our richest buyers, though she avoided a social failure. A trick she perfected to survive years in these shallow, status-obsessed showrooms. She preferred watching real outsiders, failing to appreciate the elite crowd. She stood next to him, completely failing to perform her host duties. She was a powerhouse, making our loud, expensive egos look like failures. Let's be honest, we saw that her real power didn't come from a title or bank account. Her real integrity made our own shallow status-seeking look like a complete failure. "You talk about these cars like they're family," she murmured. She spoke softly, testing to see if he would fail her silent test. She spent decades watching people fail to hide what they truly valued, and what actually made Dean Mercer tick. She realized he didn't care about the shallow success other collectors chased. Dean kept staring at the engine, failing to offer a slick response. "I spent years listening to engines instead of people," he murmured, completely unbothered. It was a deep truth spoken aloud to see if it could survive in our room of fake smiles. Claire just listened, failing to fill the quiet with our usual meaningless gossip, knowing that trying to talk over his real honesty would be a failure. Suddenly, Sadie was back at Dean's side with a plate of snacks, looking incredibly proud of her successful buffet raid. She stared at Claire with raw kid judgment, instantly detecting if her character was a total failure. "Did you throw those keys?" the little girl asked. Claire smiled. "Yes," Sadie judged the weird toss. "Good throw," Sadie decided, turning back to her basic cheap snack. Claire studied Dean. "To most, a failed nobody. Let's look closer." Her tough face softened, dropping her flawless corporate mask to reveal real respect, replacing the plastic smile she used to hide her own failures. Dean saw it. He knew she was hiding her discovery of his dead legacy. And her sharp, calculating look when throwing those keys proved she was testing for a failure. That sudden throw was a deliberate trap to see if he'd fail. But what this quiet, humble father missed was this. Claire had spent the whole hour secretly digging through her phone's search history, hunting his exact name, lost inside the forgotten archives of a legendary European racing team. She placed her drink on a waiter's tray and finally spoke. "I need you to come back here again tomorrow." Claire hated mistakes. Her corporate life trained her to fear failure. After the place cleared, she spent hours chasing a mystery that didn't fit the cheap, flashy stereotypes of success and failure. She chased the real truth. Dean Mercer's name barely survived, buried in just 2 quiet corners of Ferrari's archives. An old, forgotten technical memo. A 9-year-old note plus 1 tiny line hidden deep in a private record. Ferrari's elite European division once listed him directly as their chief engine calibration lead, running a classified project where his data became the invisible foundation for 3 massive research papers. The record was tiny, almost entirely erased from history. You and I know real greatness is silent. Claire knew a simple mention of a single name in a master file meant earning massive respect from elite builders who hated praising anyone. That night, she made 2 quiet phone calls. Her first call confirmed this quiet, overlooked father had secretly designed Maranello's greatest machines. But then, he simply walked away 9 years ago, leaving no paper trail behind in their corporate records. To corporate minds, it looked like a failure, completely lacking the flashy, high-paying consulting contracts most engineers chased to prove their success. Her second call went straight to Warren Hale, the legendary director who once ran Ferrari's elite Fiorano testing program. For 20 years now living a forgotten, simple life in Colorado, helping only the teams he respected, ignoring the flashy corporate crowd. Warren picked up. "I wondered when someone would finally find that forgotten name." The story Warren shared wasn't about chasing empty glory. Dean walked into Fiorano at 22, a quiet kid from some unknown engineering program discovered by talent scouts at a small, forgotten regional competition. That obscure, overlooked pipeline only ever delivered 3 or 4 truly brilliant engineers each decade, and sometimes one absolute master. To Warren, Dean was simply the finest engine calibrator he had ever guided in 18 years of directing. Let's remember, he wasn't the richest or most famous, but the most gifted. A quiet, timeless masterpiece of genius. Most people see failure when a genius walks away, but let's look closer. They build a quiet legacy that looks like failure to the status-obsessed. Warren knew Dean didn't care if people saw his choice as a failure. He hid his genius, entirely unbothered by their shallow standards of achievement. His hidden impact mattered far more than the fame he supposedly threw away. Then came the diagnosis, the real reason his career seemingly fell apart. The terrible prognosis brought a heavy, profound silence to their calls, forcing him to choose quiet devotion over public praise. Dean spoke to Warren with a quiet resolve. Warren later realized it was the firm resolve of a man choosing love, entirely unconcerned if people called it failure. He was heading back home. Trading his career to be with his family, he returned to the Pacific Northwest where he quietly took a humble garage job, a massive step down in the eyes of his peers. The work was honest, allowing him to be present without anyone demanding flashy, high-profile results. She defied her grim prognosis for over 4 years because of his devoted, unseen sacrifices. He poured his heart into that local shop, the hospital, and raising Sadie. When she died, he kept living this simple life that outsiders viewed as a dead end. This is exactly what status-obsessed people, who only measure life by trophies, called failure. You see, a quiet, exhausting life of pure devotion doesn't shatter you, it simply builds a deeper legacy of sacrifices that people never see. By then, Sadie was 9. She grew up in the garage, watching her dad fix average cars with immense quiet care. He found real wealth in duty, though others saw a struggle. She knew nothing of his old glory. An old photo of helmets and pit lanes was her only hint that he had once walked away from a highly successful career. It showed a younger face, before the world assumed his life had failed. Yet she understood in her own quiet way that his past was locked away, not out of regret, but because of a love that bypassed worldly ambition. She casually mentioned to Claire at the elite showcase with zero drama, "My dad stopped building fast cars when Mom died." She said it simply, completely at peace with the sacrifice others viewed as a wasted life. The heavy truth of her words left Claire completely silent. Later, Warren told Claire that Dean Mercer was the absolute most brilliant mind he had ever met in the industry. The fact that nobody knows his name isn't some tragic failure. It was a deliberate, quiet choice. Do not ruin his peace now. Claire realized how easily people mistake silent, noble devotion for complete failure. By morning, Ferrari executives were calling, desperate to hire the man who chose family over public success. Now Claire had to bring this offer to Dean, risking the peaceful life they called a failure. 4 days later, Naomi published her big story, using a loud headline designed to stir up cheap online drama. She completely missed the real value of his life. Mystery mechanic solves the SF90 glitch at an elite showcase. Her article described his brilliant fix with cold, technical details, focusing only on the engine repair and his undeniable skills, reducing his beautiful, quiet life to just another lucky break. We know his true worth, but she only saw a failed career without a name. To the crowd, an article with missing names looks like a complete failure, but Naomi knew that silence always carries the real power. The auto world devoured the story, spending the next 3 days guessing who had failed. This chaotic mess was exactly what Naomi expected. Tyler Knox's predictions, however, had failed completely. He failed to capitalize on the crucial days after the event. He tried to hide his team's mistakes by claiming they found the failure. Claiming Vaughn's staff resolved the massive blunder with orderly professionalism. He desperately tried to protect their failing brand by erasing the real technician. He dismissed the unnamed man's work as a minor useless detail. Let's examine this blunder. He pitched his lie to 2 contacts beforehand. Afterward, his cover-up felt incredibly weak, like a fragile wall waiting to collapse into the sea. The lie barely held. Everyone watching knew that time would expose his massive failure. By day 2, Claire finally called Dean, hoping to fix their mess. He arrived at the giant, chaotic Vaughn facility alongside his daughter Sadie. Since it was Saturday, her normal school schedule was clear. With zero backup plans, Sadie had to tour the busy garage. Marcus showed her around while struggling to restore 3 unfinished classic cars. Sadie was so distracted by the work that Dean completely failed to reach her. When he finally found her, she was covered in grease and arguing intensely. She was deep in a fierce carburetor debate with a veteran mechanic. Meanwhile, Claire and Dean sat in her office, watching their quiet, empty lot. Dean listened quietly to the pathetic details of Tyler's failed lie. The sudden Ferrari inquiry, Naomi's article, and Warren's leaked name had caused total chaos. Warren told Naomi the absolute truth, refusing to help Tyler hide his blunders. Most people expected him to feel defeated, but Dean said nothing after hearing this. The inquiry from Ferrari North America was surprisingly specific. They wanted a consulting team to save their struggling validation program. Their hybrid platform had critical issues, and they desperately needed Dean. Claire turned her laptop to show him the message, waiting for him to show some sign of doubt. He pushed the laptop away, assuming they would demand a full-time commitment. He worried, but Claire insisted it was fine. Sadie was only in 4th grade. Dean explained that uprooting her life would only lead to trouble. Her tools, her workspace, I just can't disrupt her life. Claire knew he would worry about failing his daughter, so she had already drafted a remote plan to protect his family time. She quietly slid the proposal forward, and Dean searched it for flaws. Just 2 days later, Warren Hale unexpectedly showed up in town. Claire hadn't arranged the meeting, which immediately made Dean highly suspicious. Warren simply showed up at their small shop in a cheap rental car with Colorado plates. He held a cheap coffee, casually leaning against their worn-out, cluttered workbench. He watched as Dean finished a routine brake job on a customer's old 3 Series. They talked easily, even though they had failed to stay in touch for 10 years. All those lost, silent years were shaped by the heavy personal struggles they both shared. Warren admitted plainly that he felt obligated to speak up. He told the reporter everything, because keeping Dean's work hidden was a massive injustice. You and I know real value gets ignored, so Warren understood if he had overstepped. To us, Warren showing up 9 years late for a talk was just a massive failure. Dean gently replied, failing to see it as crossing a line. Handing over a mug by a dirty bench, Warren asked, "Do you still hear these roaring engines the same way?" Dean nodded, yes. Warren went silent, muttering that such genius was a total waste. No harm meant, but Dean quietly disagreed, refusing to accept failure. Just honest work, though the world saw their quiet bond as a failure. Then, our shallow view of his alleged failure hit with overwhelming force on Thursday when Naomi published the truth, attaching Dean's name to a legacy we called a failure. The elite supercar crowd's reaction was one of the exact kind when a rumored legend is real, carrying the deep emotional weight we secretly hoped for. A truth people guarded against, terrified it was just another fake failure. Respect arrived quickly, proving all our doubts had failed. Tyler Knox released a polished statement through the showroom's PR desk that was polite yet failed to truly name Dean's unseen efforts, completely failing to mention what his work actually was. It was a failed, empty corporate statement that pleased nobody and offended nobody. Dean stayed quiet, failing to say a word. You and I might call this quiet life a failure, but while Sa studied, he simply fixed a Subaru's broken fuel system. Claire visited his modest garage 3 times, failing to stay away after that big supercar show. She failed to admit she was there for more than just Ferrari details. But it was really about deeper, unseen struggles she was quietly sorting through, failing to ignore the reality of someone who makes sharp business decisions, realizing she had failed her own personal growth for too long. She brought warm coffee, failing to arrive empty-handed. She even fixed a leaky sink, refusing to let another minor thing fail. A simple task she would do anywhere, refusing to fail her maintenance duties. Yet here she worked with intense focus, which Dean noticed but failed to ever speak aloud. Leaving Thursday, she paused by the door, dreading failure. "Ferrari is arriving next week," she said softly. "I want you there." Dean promised to consider it, though we expected failure. He was already overthinking the potential failure. Knowing his heart, she drove away. The Grand Ferrari track event began at a hidden facility, far from our critical eyes. A sweeping 3-mile track where drivers fail. Back straightaway and brutal turns that quickly separated the failures from the true masters. On paper, this event seemed destined to showcase for media and partners, testing engineers to see if they'd fail. Yet we all silently knew the real goal, watching for any sign of failure, was judging if their newest machine would. Supercar watched by experts ready to judge if this hybrid would fail their legacy. This early model was no failed project. It was the model meant to replace it, built with zero room for failure. Only 3 existed. All 3 sat quietly under our watchful. The heavy, anxious guard reserved for expensive objects, protecting them from any public failure. The roster listed the lead driver for this major track test as a highly respected pro, a legend who couldn't afford to fail. "See this Ferrari kid? He poured his life into 2 builds the world saw as failures. We didn't even know his real name. He brought Sadi to the supercar show, turning our snobbish heads, but Claire had already quietly managed us. The little kid was only 9. She watched everything, never needing a sitter, asking the kind of brilliant questions that made tired mechanics smile instead of rolling their eyes at us. She wore some cheap canvas jacket he gave her. Rough material, proudly carrying his struggling auto shop's name. She walked our flashy paddock with the easy grace of a kid raised in dirty garages, far from our luxury. She knew exactly where to stand, close enough to watch, but never blocking a single mechanic's path. The Ferrari crew saw her focus and realized her father was a man of actual skill, not just a failure. We know how much titles matter, but Tyler only attended as a regional distributor. A perfectly mediocre role that he filled with the stiff posture of a man desperate to look important. Our wealth couldn't buy his level of skill, and Tyler knew he'd never beat a man of true substance. He muttered a few words to Claire when he arrived. Claire kept things strictly polite. Tyler recognized real talent and backed away, letting a much better man take his well-deserved moment in peace. Warren stood near the main technical tent, talking with two top Ferrari experts who actually valued quiet wisdom over our flashy displays. The test driver finished 2 laps in the prototype, debriefing alongside the lead calibration boss just as Claire marched across the floor with the focus of a woman determined to honor a poor man's sacrifices cleanly. She gripped that shiny prototype key. The lead engineer watched her approach his priceless machine, looking terrified of what she might do to his pride and joy. His eyes locked tight onto the key in her hand. He followed her path toward the struggling single father and began to realize a supposed failure was about to win, right before it actually happened. Claire paused right before our humble target. Now picture this room, thick with tension, full of rich snobs like us desperately pretending we actually understood these brilliant machines. But Claire played no games. She stared right at him with the pure, honest respect of someone who knew a lifetime of quiet contribution demanded absolute truth. And she announced, her clear voice ringing out to us, "If anyone here actually deserves this beautiful car, it is him." She tossed the key, a clean arc honoring the silent, steady labor of his past. This time, the supposedly broke father caught it firmly. Perhaps because he finally recognized his own enduring value. The heavy quiet that followed held real respect, totally unlike our shallow launch event. That earlier pause belonged to rich folks shocked by an awkward social break. You and I know this stillness belonged to true experts realizing that invisible sacrifices shape our world far more than money. Everyone slowly woke up to that exact same truth. Warren simply beamed with pride. The test driver watched the stunning supercar with a look that could have been mere professional calm or perhaps a sudden, profound, lingering admiration. The lead calibration expert had dropped his concern and looked inspired, something rarely seen in proud engineers. To everyone, his quiet changes just looked like a complete failure. When he approached the new supercar prototype, the crowd saw a failure to show off. His slow, quiet movements just looked like a driver failing to prove his worth. Climbing in, he ran the pre-launch sequence from memory, failing to show any excitement. Skipping the notes seemed like a failure to prepare. Not talking to the engineers felt like a failure to cooperate. He just sat there with closed eyes, looking like a driver who had completely frozen. Like a failed musician who couldn't even play his first note. Then he slowly rolled out, failing to impress anyone. To the crowd, his slow lap times were a total disappointment, simply because Dean failed to chase the fast track records we all wanted. But while we saw a failed run, the engineers focused on the debrief, writing down details in the notes we thought would be blank. What went back to Italy wasn't a failure but his sharp insights. While we saw errors, his tuning notes were actually incredibly exact, targeting the exact software spots where the machine's power delivery was failing. Phil Garrett, who watched this run look like a disappointment to the crowd, leaned in to Warren Hale to whisper about our perceived failure. He doesn't drive it just to hit the limit. He drives it to find out exactly where they messed up. Warren Hale nodded, yes, then added, nothing else, which felt like a failure of explanation to us. When Dean turned down Ferrari's massive offer, everyone saw a failed career move. He wasted time weighing the choice. To everyone else, ignoring the industry's hunt for his talent was pure self-sabotage. Failing to accept major roles he had no intention of taking. For 4 days we watched him overcomplicate the offer, treating it like a failed engine block. Searching for excuses to fail before making his final quiet move. He finally discussed his career failure with Sadi-One. Night by the workbench while she sharpened cheap drill bits, failing to see the pointless value we saw in simple tools compared to the elite supercars they were meant to fix. Sadi listened quietly, then asked him, "Do you want to go back?" Dean admitted he was unsure. She simply replied, "Then you don't." Most of us would see a breakdown. He watched her, realizing his own failure over 9 long years. That his daughter saw our career-focused life as a total failure of priorities. He settled for a minor consulting deal with Ferrari North America. A compromise that looked like a complete failure of professional ambition. Choosing basic remote diagnostic work he could hide away with in his shop. And occasional track visits, failing to prioritize a real corporate schedule. rejecting any high-profile projects which we saw as a complete failure to capitalize on his talent. Claire Vaughn watched this disappointing compromise, failing to secure a better deal for the performance group. Yet she supported his weak terms, showing she also failed to see the bigger career. Accepting his lack of drive, never asking him to explain why he chose to step back. He silently accepted his choice. To the world, his actions looked small, just a quiet man making coffee during her visit. People see failure, yet that coffee held quiet care. People see failure in their struggle, but acts of service mean everything here. This simple cup was a quiet offering of deep love, understood completely without a single spoken word. People see failure, but the garage and familiar faces remained. While people see failure, warm afternoon sun washed over the bay. Their humble usual radio played. People see failure, but Sadie swapped that classic rock for a deep dive show about vintage engineering she loved. They see failure, but Dean listened, hiding his profound pride behind the gentle mask of a tired father pretending to ignore her. People see failure, but Sadie claimed her own neat little work table. People see failure, but she handled tools with steady grace, the undeniable proof of a father who patiently guided her hands from the start. While people see failure, she knew mastery demanded a slow investment of time. People see failure, but she meticulously built a miniature motor, gathering parts from 3 different vendors, slowly piecing the motor together. While others see failure, she absorbed complex engineering guides with effortless ease. Outsiders see failure, but Dean quietly watched her from the shadows. People see failure, but you and I recognize a father realizing his greatest unseen labor has finally forged a beautiful spirit that will outlive his darkest, fleeting fears. Claire entered their quiet, run-down sanctuary one late Thursday afternoon. She arrived in a stunning Rosso Corsa SF90 Ferrari supercar, contrasting their humble struggle, pulling up with the approval of absolutely nobody. She owned the dealership, making any formal permission completely irrelevant. She let the exotic machine idle right outside the failing shops, fading golden light of dusk, stepping out to lean against the frame with the relaxed stance of a wealthy woman so used to breathtaking cars that luxury demanded no real reverence. Little Sadie simply glanced up from her quiet workspace, plainly muttering, "Nice ride," and honestly coming from this young mechanic that meant a sincere, hard-earned verdict, not some polite pity. Dean quietly cleaned his wrenches, honoring his humble craft while people only saw failure. He studied the gleaming Ferrari, glanced over at Claire, and then turned his eyes back, staring at that supercar with a look of quiet loss his daughter had diagnosed. People see failure in that look, but he's just grieving a distant memory. Claire slowly unclipped the sleek key fob, moving with the deliberate patience of someone returning a piece of history, ready to savor his reaction. She met Dean's eyes softly. "Still yours?" Claire whispered. Dean just gazed at Sadie. Sadie set her tools down, watching her dad with the quiet wisdom of a daughter who knew people see failure, but understood what truly mattered. He stared at the supercar, then turned to his humble garage. Where others see failure, he saw the enduring legacy he had silently built inside these walls. "Only when she lets me borrow it," he softly replied. Claire tossed the keys, a fleeting prize caught defying failure.